Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's do that again. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It is wonderful to be with you, and I don't see anybody that I don't know who's here in the sanctuary, but if you are joining us for the first time via Zoom, my name is Reverend Angela Denton, and I welcome you to our service. So this morning, we are going to resume our series on forgiveness as we have been journeying through the fourfold path of forgiveness that has been gifted to each and every one of us in the book of forgiving, in workshops, in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that Desmond Tutu won the Nobel Peace Prize for, and his daughter, co-author of this great piece of work, Mfu. And so we have done a lot of exploring. What is forgiveness? What it is not? When we're ready and willing to even undertake this process, we looked at in any time that we experience a hurt, a suffering, that we always have one of two choices: to follow the path of forgiveness, of releasing, letting go, to be transformed, allowing everything to be our teacher, or we can choose to go to the path of rewounding, holding on to the story, allowing the wounds to fester in us. And we began entering, and I invited each one of you in the beginning, who is that one person? Yourself? Is it another? That you were interested in walking this journey, having an open mind, knowing that there's many ways or paths to forgiveness, but being willing and open to enter into this journey. So we looked at the first step, which is telling the story. And here it was telling just the factual information of the event, the painful memory, without embellishing, putting any moralistic judgment, assigning it to the person or the situation. And then step 2 asked us to look at, not to do a spiritual bypass, but to allow ourselves to name each and every hurt and emotion, and giving those emotions space to breathe. Seeking support if you are going through the grieving process. Knowing that sometimes when we experience something traumatic in our lives, that in order to cope in the situation, we a lot of times stuff things down. So naming that hurt is that opportunity for allow that to breathe, to be uncovered, so that it doesn't play in the background of our lives, but nevertheless, it shows up in the projections in our lives and in our words and how we are acting. And then we looked at granting forgiveness, which is the third step. Now, these are not lineal. We sometimes have to go back and forth, especially between 1, 2, and 3. And to grant forgiveness, it means that I am intentionally making the choice to forgive. That in order to do this, I'm willing to open my heart rather than shuttering it. I'm willing to look at possibly our common humanity. Thereby grace go I. Looking, knowing that sometimes I may have inflicted hurt. Now, I'm not talking about violence and abuse here. But then I wonder what story this individual of their lives may have experienced, what pain and suffering is spilling out onto them that spilled out onto me and the world around them. And that statement of grace, the metaphysical meaning, the mystical meaning, the words that the master teacher spoke, Father, forgive me, they know not what they do. It doesn't mean that they may not know morally what's right or wrong, but in that asleep state of consciousness, knowing nothing other than the conditioning they were raised in, only knowing the abuse they may have been raised in, only knowing what you've been exposed to, what the world tells us we should be, how we should be. From that place, when we say with the sincerest heart that we are willing, we choose to forgive, that moment of grace can meet us. Something greater than us meets us. And so today, we are going to begin to explore the fourth step in the fourfold journey of forgiveness, and that is making the choice to either renew or release a relationship. And so before we dive into what that means, I'd like to share yet another forgiveness story. These people of each one of the stories I've shared with you have had the courage, and I know I am inspired by their story. It fills me with inspiration and I know that me too. And expanding the meaning of the master teacher saying, these things and more you can do. And so today I share the story of the Wagner family. Pictured here, we see Dan and Lynn, and above them in a picture frame, there are two daughters, Mandy and Carrie. So I'm going to take us back a couple of weeks after 9/11, 2001. It was a Sunday evening about 10 a.m., and the Wagner family just finished participating in an outreach event in Santa Cruz, California. The beachfront, it was to support those who are underprivileged. And so they were filled with excitement. And one by one, they went into, got into their minivan, buckled up, and began their journey home, sharing stories, laughing, filled with such gratitude for all that they experienced over the weekend. And then 20 minutes into the drive, Dan came upon an intersection where he stopped, had the right of way, no cars were coming, and he proceeded. And then barreling from the east side was a Chevy Suburban going at warp speed. It wound up careening into the Wagner's minivan, which began to spin out of control, hit the lamppost, knocked down one of the major street signs. Their car continued to spin, hit a Volvo that was parked, and finally landed on the front lawn of a corner house in a neighborhood. There was loud noises, screeches, crashing, and so neighbors came running out of their house to the scene of the accident, trying to be of assistance to the family. The ambulance, the police were called. Lynn and Dan were rushed to the nearest hospital. And unfortunately, Mandy and Carrie were pronounced dead at the scene of the accident. Can't imagine, as a mother or anybody in our family, having to get that news, to have that experience. Lynn and Dan lay in the ICU. Lynn was unconscious for one day. She had a broken tailbone, pelvis, broken ribs, and Dan had severe injuries to his neck. He had shards of glass that penetrated and injured him from head to toe, and he also had a sprained coccyx. When they both respectively woke up in their different times, neither one of them had any recollection of the accident. And needless to say, when they were informed of the tragedy of losing both of their daughters, they were grief-stricken, heartbroken. They discovered that Lisa, who was the driver, was high on coke, meth, and alcohol. And she pled guilty and was sent to prison. And Lisa and Dan shared they had such anger. Not only were they filled with grief, but anger and rage began to consume them. How could this woman be so irresponsible and selfish to do such a heinous act? And not only did they have anger towards Lisa, but they felt angry at God, the God of their understanding. If God is the epitome of love, how could she allow this tragedy to befall their family? A couple of months later, it's the Christmas holiday. And Lisa remembers sharing, how could I ever celebrate Christmas or any other holiday? I don't know if I'll ever believe in something greater than me again. And they refused their family and friends and just shuttered themselves in their home. Family and friends wondered if their marriage would be torn apart, whether it would survive. And so month after month goes by, but their family and friends and their people from their church community did not give up. And eventually they were open, Dan and Lynn were open to receiving support, not only from their pastor, but also from therapists. They were introduced to Desmond and Mfu's work, The Fourfold Path. And with great courage, they said, yes, we cannot live with this poison in our hearts. And so they began the process, telling the story, naming the hurt, doing trauma work, making the choice to try to understand and to forgive. Fast forward 7 years later, we're now in August of 2008, and Lynn and Dan receive a letter from the parole board stating that Lisa was being released, soon to be released. She had served 85% of her sentence, but she would be released. And so Lynn and Dan had this discussion and they said, you know what? We need to release this. We need to release this relationship. And so they thought like a way that they could close this chapter and be done was to set up a situation where they would meet with Lisa before she was let go of prison in a controlled situation, because they didn't know what would happen if they ran into her at the grocery store or somewhere else in town. And so they were granted this permission. And so off Lynn and Dan go, and they finally were escorted to the room where Lisa waited. The door opened and Lynn went in first. She saw the pain on Lisa's face. And she said she had this sudden urge to just hug her, realizing that they all had been through so much. Dan joined in and they just cried and they sobbed. And she said, it was grace. There was no more hatred, no more anger, just relief, freedom. And they sat down to have a conversation, and Lisa began to tell the story of sharing with them that she has been in a 12-step recovery program, and that the 9th step, making amends, for her was going to be a living amends. And so Lynn and Dan didn't know what that meant to be a living amends. She said that I am going to speak this story. I'm going to share about my healing. I'm going to share about my painful past. My desire to make amends and to be forgiven means I'm going to dedicate my life. And if I could save one life, then I will feel a little bit more peace in my heart. And so Lynn wanted to know more and wanted to know if she could join Lisa. And guess what? Dan and Lynn went in to release the relationship, but what happened was a renewal. A new story was formed. Lynn and Lisa would travel around the country to schools, to recovery programs, to prisons, to churches, to share their story in hopes that maybe it would open someone's heart to forgive or to seek help or recovery. And so let us now look at what does it actually mean when we say we need to make the choice to renew or release. So there's some things that you need to know before we dive into the meaning of both. Before you can even imagine contemplating whether you're going to renew or release a relationship, you must have sincerely engaged in the first 3 steps. No bypassing one, no half, no half butt stuff. And you may need to take whatever time it needs for each one, and you may find yourself at 3 cycling back to naming the hurt, because there's maybe some more to release. And you need to know that it is a personal choice. Even though family members and friends all tried to convince Lynn and Dan, it needed to be a personal choice, not one that they were guilted into, should have, could have, all of that. And Desmond says, if you have the opportunity to renew in any situation, it is preferable because it is where really rich transformation occurs. And it's from the history of doing the work, Mufu shares that usually when the hurt is between or among family members, there's usually more of a desire to try to renew. And sometimes a tendency, if it's more of a distant relationship, like an acquaintance or a stranger, the tendency may be to just release it. So now let's look at what it actually means if we're going to choose to renew, and then we'll look at what it means to release. And before, let us look, as we look at the steps of that renewal. Renewal is a characteristic of one of our 12 spiritual powers, our power of life. And our power of life is a new start, not going back to where it was and continuing, creating a fresh start, a new beginning. It is the resurrection to new life. And so here is what we must do personally in self-reflecting before we can even have that dialogue. To renew or release means it's not just what I want to do, but there's an engagement with the other or others. So self-reflection is number 1. Am I going to renew or release? What do I need to contemplate if I'm even going to think about renewing? Need to identify my own shortcomings, missteps. Now, sometimes that is maybe not the case. Like in the situation with Lynn and Dan and their daughters, they were not at fault. They didn't run the light or a stop sign. But perhaps maybe that also it's not just how did I contribute to this situation? How did I contribute to the conflict? But it's also looking at Where am I asking to see something anew? And maybe for Lynn and Dan is maybe seeking that new understanding of a God of their understanding, which is a mystery to us all. But knowing that God is something bigger than a man in the sky that dispenses good and evil like a Santa Claus, naughty and nice list. That it's not just love, but it's the love in our hearts, in expression, and we get to choose it. It might be that someone did something unkind, but maybe in my reaction, my words were not from a place of respect, and I was not centered in the truth of me. So maybe I need to make amends for that. And then we look at what are the needs here? I can't go back to the way it was, those patterns that were just not working. Do I need clear communication? Am I looking for an apology? Am I seeking understanding what was happening? In a case of betrayal, do I want the truth and not another lie? Please tell me the truth. We may agree to certain boundaries for clear communication, or perhaps we need some counseling together. We cannot go back to the way it was. And then the last part of the self-reflection is, have I really granted forgiveness? Have I really named the hurts? You see, we can't just say, yeah, I want to be in relationship with you, but let's not have the discussion. It's the right thing to do. It's the spiritual thing to do. I can't kick this person out of my life, but we don't have that difficult conversation with them. Sometimes they may not get it. Do I change my patterns of how I'm being around them, or do I just grin and bear it? And then we come to the point where it's a relationship, so we share. We have to have that dialogue. There's a give and take, open listening, where I get to share my needs. I seek to understand what are your needs. What was your suffering? What was going on? There's a negotiation. You have to know what your non-negotiables are. Maybe in a relationship, being unfaithful is a non-negotiable to you. Maybe it's not for another, but you guys get to determine that. And then how we are being with one another is one of respect, aligned to the truth of us. Doesn't mean we don't say no. And we may realize as we have this dialogue, I'm not ready yet, or there might be irreconcilable differences here. And so I will continue to pray for you, but I don't think I can be in relationship with you. And so now we look at what does it mean to have faux renewal. I think I spoke about it a little bit. And here's a quote from Desmond Tutu. We do not go back to where we were before the hurt happened and pretend it never happened. And here's what you need to know. Even healthy relationship, every relationship needs ongoing renewal. Ongoing. Look, see, tell the truth. Because if we're all growing, right, we need to look at certain things. What do you mean, Mom? What happened when you told the doctor that you don't smoke and that you're taking your medicine? I'm sorry I lost my patience with you, but I really need to understand. Do you want to try something holistic? And we have those conversations, and we don't just roll our eyes and pretend it didn't happen. So, when is it time to release the relationship? Well, if you are in an abusive relationship of any kind, until that person gets help, it is time to release that relationship. If somebody has physically passed on, it is a release. It doesn't mean that you can't communicate with the person, but again, this is about shared communication. And I believe you can have communication come to you for those that are beyond, but it's not in this physical sense. Or if you have the irreconcilable differences. And then there is an option of agreeing to disagree. And so I like to share, before we begin to close and go into a meditative exercise, this quote about releasing relationships by Desmond. And he shares with us this: releasing a relationship is how you free yourself from victimhood and trauma. You can choose to not have someone in your life any longer, but you have released the relationship only when you have truly chosen the path without wishing harm or ill, re-wounding of yourself or others, allowing yourself to retell the story over and over, being identified by the old story over and over. Releasing is refusing to let an experience or a person occupy space in your head and your heart. It is releasing not only their relationship, but like I said, the old story of the relationship. Let us breathe that in. So, I've asked you to take this journey. Who is the person? And if it's yourself, know that the next service in this series will be about when it's a little deepening and when it is us that we are wanting to forgive ourselves for something. Who is that person? Close your eyes. And as you bring your awareness to your breath, get a sense. Getting a sense of your breath. Sensing the warmth of each breath that emanates in and out of your nose. Sensing the sensations in your body as you recall this individual. Allowing whatever emotion to be present. Hurt, disdain, anger, gratitude. Allowing it all to be present. As you allow yourself to breathe into each and every emotion. From the low notes to the high notes, allowing each emotion to be your teacher, a spiritual messenger of that which tells you it's time to let go, and those that call us into that place of deep love, compassion, and gratitude. There by grace go I, as we listen to the words of the Master Teacher. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Knowing that the Father is the call for us, the desire for us to be lifted from our human consciousness to that of illuminating Christ consciousness, Buddha consciousness, that which is greater than our human understanding. And right there in our hearts, in that willingness, grace meets us. Sense that individual now in your consciousness. And allow my words to be your words as we speak these words to the teacher that stands before us, those we wish to forgive, those who we are contemplating the wisdom of whether I should release or renew the relationship. And so we speak these words. Oh, we cannot begin again. We cannot make a new start pretending that the past did not occur. But we can plant something new. We can plant something new in the burnt ground. And in the time, we will harvest a new story of who and what we are. We will build a relationship that is tempered by the fire of history and fueled by grace. Oh, you may be a person who I believe has hurt me. And I know as I look into my humanity, I can be a person who can hurt another. And oh, as we know these truths, we can choose to make a new story. Forgiveness is my backbend to clear away the dead tangle of hurt and recrimination. And it is to make space. Forgiveness is to make space, to ready a field fit for planting. And when I stand to survey this place, I can choose to invite you in to sow seeds for a different harvest. Or I can choose to let you go and let the field lie fallow. And so in the stillness of my being, I search the wisdom of my unified heart-mind. Do I desire to renew or to release this relationship as I listen in the stillness? And as we breathe in and out, allow the words of Freeman Miller to fill you in heart, mind, and soul. Oh, we meet again beyond the barren past, beyond the pride, the sorrows, and the tears. And yearnings leave the strife of hate of years. And our souls are now flooded with a peace that lasts. Our hearts release the wrong so deep and vast, the wounding words and all the cruel woe, till joy is all our bounding bosoms know. And life is renewed and free at last. Love, deathless and forgiving, crowns with bays the fertile future and our hopes, full of grace. As youth had fondly dreamed in other days, when first we knew how sweet was her embrace. Divine, endless purpose guides the feet of humankind. Beyond our pride, we meet again in love, renewed by the elixir of love, the love for the sake of loving. And so it is, breathing in and breathing out, allowing something greater than yourself to meet you right where you are and guide you every step of the way. Rubbing your hands on your legs, rubbing your hands together, stretching as a symbol of possibly your openness. May I be free. May we be free. May we know the grace of forgiveness, the grace of renewal, the grace of release. And so it is. Amen. And when you are ready, I invite you to slowly open your eyes